Welcome along then to the Belgian Grand Prix, the race that gave us the maiden victory for the Jordan team in 1998. And in the same team, the phenomenal debut of a young Michael Schumacher. There's always something special around one of the many corners of this fan-favourite circuit. Spa-Francorchamps today, a circuit that spans 4.35 miles. There are tons of elevation changes along the way too. 19 corners making up this circuit, with 9 of those to the right and the remaining 10 to the left. This track is a great one for fans of pure speed. The average lap speed comes close to a whopping 145 miles an hour. Anthony Davidson joins me once again in the commentary box, and it's fantastic to have you with us here today. But I'm curious, as a man with experience out on the track, how do you stop those pre-race nerves from becoming overwhelming when you're lining up on the grid?
But from the moment qualifying's over, you start to feel the adrenaline in your body build up and the buzz in your stomach as you anticipate the run down into turn 1. It's all a bit like going into battle, and the unknown situation makes you nervous. Those pre-race nerves are a good thing. The day you don't have them means that you don't care anymore. And of course, you have to make sure that all the procedures are second nature to you, so that they're not taking up too much of your capacity.
Before we begin, let's take a quick look at the grid lineup for today's race. It's Carlos Sainz in pole position, and Johnson completes the front row. Moving on to the rest of the grid, we have Verstappen, Ricciardo, Valtteri Bottas, and Norris, Leclerc, Fernando Alonso, Stroll, and Sergio Perez, Tsunoda, Giovinazzi, Nicholas Latifi, and Gasly. They've taken a grid penalty. Schwartzman, Russell, Luca Giotto, and Mick Schumacher, Aitken, Hamilton, Mazepin, and Esteban Ocon rounds off the grid. That's it then, it's time to go racing as we head to trackside for today's race.
Alright guys, hopefully this lineup this time will be a lot better than the last week. Starting with a 1-2 for Unity, Carlos Sainz in first place and myself in second. And the qualifying times felt pretty good this time, as you can see on the screen. But if you see, qualifying 3 was in the rain, so we had to stick with that dry build on our car. So 22 lap race, we're starting in second on the front row with Carlos Sainz. Hopefully they won't be dishing out any good penalties or some yellow flags on this race. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up the rest of this formation lap and get this race going.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, our 5 red lights are on for a 1-2 start with Unity Racing here. And we are off to a good start. It's going to be myself on the outside lane there, Max Verstappen on the inside. We end up holding the outside lane against Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz. And I'm going a little bit wide over the curb, causing a little bit of a gap between Carlos Sainz and myself, about a half second or greater. There's going to be about a half second between myself and Max Verstappen after we come up this hill here, as well with Daniel Ricciardo, Valtteri Bottas, and Lando Norris. Lando Norris ends up making a move on Valtteri Bottas, moving Lando Norris to P5, making McLaren P4 and 5 at the start of this race, as you can see there on the screen on the left side. Moving on to the downhill section, took a little bit of getting used to during practice sessions. Qualifying wasn't really an issue. I had a couple turns where we ended up spinning out during practice, but as soon as we learned our apexes on those lines, we were able to fine-tune on our braking points for that. And holding a strong gap as we go a little bit wide there, giving Max Verstappen a little bit of room to catch up to us on that last turn, like I was saying, like you finding that apex on that racing line. But everybody else is about half second or so between P1 and P5. A little bit more of a gap between myself and Carlos Sainz because of that turn there. We're rounding out the end of lap 1, and the only notable position change that I did notice was Lando Norris getting position on Valtteri Bottas. Moving on now to the start of lap 4. Not really any other position changes have been made, but Daniel Ricciardo is losing a gap on Max Verstappen, about 1.7 to 2.0 seconds there. You can notice there Fernando Alonso loses a couple of positions, and Charles Leclerc as well. Looks like a double knockout for Ferrari. We have Charles Leclerc here in the second Ferrari. You can see smoke there, and he basically rams into the back of the other Ferrari. We're going to be pulling up another perspective here from Fernando Alonso. Basically see what happens. He's coming up the hill, and I believe it was a lockup or something wrong with the engine. And the other Ferrari, as he's trying to move over, just basically rams into the front end. Rams his front end into him. So lap 4, I wasn't thinking, and I had elected to stay out, and I didn't realize that it was going to be a free pit stop. After I realized it, it was a big mistake, because I could have double pit stopped with Carlos Sainz's pitting right now that you see on the screen, where I wouldn't have gotten as bad as a position as I would have if I were to stay out, because me ending up staying out, I got stuck behind the pace car, and being in front of the pack with a pace car, and then coming in the next lap and going in for pits, it really hurt me. With the double Ferrari knockout, it basically put me in last place in P20 after our change to hard tires. We didn't go with the mediums. But yeah, that's our mistake. After not playing this game for a little bit, our strategy was a little rough. But nothing too big to worry about really, as we can definitely work on that pace. We have a longer lifespan on these hard tires that we can use to get back up in the pack, as we got a lot of people to get past in order to get some points on the board. Coming on to lap 9 restart. Lap 8 to lap 9, we have Carlos Sainz here in P2, about 0.2 seconds behind Valtteri Bottas, who's now the race leader. Robert Schwartzman elected to stay out as well. He's about 4 seconds behind Carlos Sainz, followed by Luca Giotto, Daniel Ricciardo to round out the top 5. Max Verstappen ended up pitting, and he is P6 right now. Moving on to lap 11, Carlos Sainz in P1 decides to make his second pit stop of the race. I believe he went with a double soft, and I believe he was going with a medium here. I don't recall. We'll see her in a moment. But new leader of the race is Daniel Ricciardo, followed by Max Verstappen and Lando Norris. So McLaren leading very strongly for about the halfway point of this race here. And as I was believed to see, Carlos Sainz comes out with the mediums, and here we are going from P9 to P10 as we pass him. So here's a replay from my perspective. We go a little bumper to bumper, take that lane a little bit wide, get some of that launch time, and on that straight, try to brake as late as possible here without hitting any of the cars, take that apex really well, bring that momentum into turn 1. As you can see, Carlos Sainz in front of us there. We have the momentum to get past him as he's coming out of the pits. So right now, I believe our position is P8, P9 Unity, about halfway through this race, and we're done with our pit stop. So P9, P10, I was pretty close behind George Russell, Esteban Ocon, Sergio Perez, coming up on the uphill section. Going through the first chicane on the uphill section, and basically trying to close in on George Russell. Carlos Sainz having the faster tires once they get warmed up with that first lap. He's going to end up passing me on this downhill section here. We give him the room on the inside to pass me. He's like, okay, he has the faster tires, we'll let him go through. And we'll work on what we can on getting past Ocon when we get up to him with these hard tires. Carlos Sainz now sitting P7, and I sitting P8 after making a move on Valtteri Bottas, Mick Schumacher. A couple position changes after some pit stops. So now myself and Carlos Sainz are in the chance for points. Lap 14, end of lap 14, start of lap 15 out of 22. We have a little bit of fight from the Mercedes here on the outside. We're trying to hold our lane. You can see him in the mirrors. And a little bit of bumper-to-bumper contact. I wasn't sure if it was a sidewall or a side pod. Sorry. Side pod contact, but Venturi Bottas trying to regain position. Because we're basically fighting Mercedes at this point for championship points. We're about halfway through this, we're over halfway through the season, and we need to hold them off as best as we can, with Venturi Bottas having those medium tires and myself having those old hard tires that we put on so much earlier in the race. Venturi Bottas staying within about 0.5 seconds behind us, trying to get up in the gearbox. Carlos Sainz, keep our racing line as best as we can, as Sergio Perez and Carlos Sainz fight for position. Carlos Sainz ends up making the move as we try to make a move as well on Sergio Perez on this downhill section, but I have to be really careful about my racing line because I have Venturi Bottas right up in my gearbox as well. Hitting the chicane again, and these lines, you can't really, there's not really any margin for error here. You just have to follow suit and make sure you're not ramming into the person in front of you, because it's too risky to go too wide. Moving on to the start of lap 18. Making a move, dive bomb on the inside of the lane against the Aston Martin. As you can see, the Red Bull and I believe it's the other Aston Martin, no. Aston Martin, Mercedes, Red Bull. Carlos Sainz now in P5, myself in P6, fighting to hold those positions against Antonio Giovinazzi and Venturi Bottas as they are fighting for a position. Lewis Hamilton, Carlos Sainz also fighting for position up ahead of us, with Daniel Ricciardo, Max Verstappen, and Lando Norris in top 3, with about 5 laps to go. Venturi Bottas trying to fight me for that position. He ends up taking it for maybe a millisecond. We take it back, holding that line properly and defending up against him. About 4.7 seconds behind Carlos Sainz, with 5 laps to go. Finishing out the rest of this downhill section and moving on towards the end of the race. Moving on to our final lap, Daniel Ricciardo, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris will be rounding out our top 3. Not really any other position changes as we're trying to catch up to Lewis Hamilton with Venturi Bottas a close 0.9 seconds behind us. So once again, the finishing order of this race is going to be Daniel Ricciardo, P1, Max Verstappen, P2, and Lando Norris round of the top 3. Carlos Sainz in P4, Lewis Hamilton in P5, and myself in P6. Very good fight. McLaren gets some points on the board, and we also get some points on the board against Mercedes.
A difficult race then on one of the all-time classic circuits, but they persevered to take the win here today. Talk to me, Ant. What was it that set them apart from the competition today?
It was a question of right place, right time today. We were looking at an entirely different race before the safety car came out, but they were able to take full advantage after the field had been bunched up.
As the winners make their way up to the podium, one can only imagine the celebrations that will take place at McLaren tonight. Congratulations to everyone on the team, securing the win and proving they're a force to be reckoned with out on the track. Carlos Sainz extends his lead at the top, getting ever closer to securing the championship. Some amazing talent out on the track today, but Anthony, who would you pick as your driver of the day?
It's got to be Lewis Hamilton. I mean, he pulled off some impressive feats out on the track today, even by his standards.
It's time to see how things are shaping up in the Constructors' Championship. The lead at the top comes down after a strong weekend from the challenging pack. There was also a strong showing from the McLaren team today as they make their way up the standings. Well, Ant, an end to another fantastic weekend of racing. Thanks to everyone who joined us, and we'll see you for the next one.